Crime, especially violent crime, has unfortunately become endemic in our young democracy, eroding the confidence of the people at large. In this week's Rich History report, Subri Governor recalls the fear, intimidation and threats that the former apartheid regime used against the Indian origin people in the early 1990s, at a time when political changes were in the air and South Africa was preparing for the first democratic elections in 1994.
It was a period in the early 1990s, after the unbanning of political organizations such as the ANC and the PAC and the release of leaders such as Nelson Mandela. Most of the Indian origin people who had played an enormous role in the struggles for liberation in the ANC, the United Democratic Front, the Natal Indian Congress, the Transvaal Indian Congress, the trade unions and anti-apartheid sport organizations were looking forward to the establishment of the new non-racial and democratic South Africa. But elements in the former apartheid regime had other ideas. They used their security agents to instill fear in the Indian origin community about a non-racial black majority government. The apartheid security system deployed its black agents in areas such as Chatsworth and Phoenix to threaten and intimidate the residents about what would happen in the new South Africa. For instance, in several areas, black men would knock on the doors of Indian residents and say, "This house is going to be given to me after April 1994, and therefore you better start moving out now." Another fear tactic was where black men would enter the yard of a householder and say, "My family and I of 10 will be visiting from Zululand at the weekend. I demand that you provide us with board and lodging for this period." Then, of course, there was the sudden increase in crime in the so-called Indian residential areas. The incidents caused a great deal of unease within the community, and many people began to question their future in the new South Africa. One of the leaders I spoke to about the uneasiness within the community was attorney, politician, and columnist Pat Puvelingham.
I will draw a parallel with India. After 1947, particularly in southern India, there was this anti-Brahmin sentiment which drew a thrill of fear among the Brahmins. I'm talking about the Dravidian movement, the DMK and the DK, the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam. Now, they tried to undermine the Brahmins, but they failed, simply because the Brahmins had the benefit of long tradition, many generations of education. Similarly here, the Indian community is undergoing some unease, but I think they will overcome it, and I think that in 5 or 6 years' time, when the transition has come to an end, the black people in this country will realize that they need the expertise, they need the acumen, they need the industry of the Indian community, and there will be a rethinking on the part of the blacks and a readjustment on the part of the Indians.
Puvelingham, who is a columnist
Crime, especially violent crime, has unfortunately become endemic in our young democracy, eroding the confidence of the people at large. In this week's Rich History report, Subri Governor recalls the fear, intimidation and threats that the former apartheid regime used against the Indian origin people in the early 1990s, at a time when political changes were in the air and South Africa was preparing for the first democratic elections in 1994.
It was a period in the early 1990s after the unbanning of political organizations such as the ANC and the PAC and the release of leaders such as Nelson Mandela. Most of the Indian origin people who had played an enormous role in the struggles for liberation in the ANC, the United Democratic Front, the Natal Indian Congress, the Transvaal Indian Congress, the trade unions and anti-apartheid sport organizations were looking forward to the establishment of the new non-racial and democratic South Africa. But elements in the former apartheid regime had other ideas. They used their security agents to instill fear in the Indian origin community about a non-racial black majority government. The
Good
apartheid
afternoon, everyone. Apologies for a slightly delayed start. We did try to keep time, as Farooq would have, but you are all welcome. We'd like to thank you for taking time to attend this memorial service for our late comrade, Dr. Farooq Meer, somebody whom all of us at different levels and different points interacted with. With me is Farooq's grandson, Dr. Suhail Essa, and he is the co-program director for this event. Before we continue, let me call upon Rashida Meer, Farooq's wife, to come and light a candle of remembrance. Rashida? Thank you. And she is assisted by Bilal, Farooq's son as well. Let me hand over to Suhail.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste and welcome to all of our esteemed guests present here today and from afar that are watching via our live stream. My name is Suhail Essa. I am Dr. Farooq Meer's eldest grandson, and I will be your co-program director for this afternoon. I'd like to call upon everyone to stand as we play the national anthem.
Say
Today, there will be many people who will speak on behalf of my grandfather and the legacy that he left behind. But I think I'd be remiss in saying my grandfather was a fairly fiery and prolific speaker himself. And so before we start, I want his presence to be felt here today. We're going to play a clip of a speech he delivered in this very hall. I believe it was in the 70s, so that you and all of us here today can see what my grandfather stood for.
Siyophinda sidelele uyokhala urash phansi uyokhala urash phansi uyokhala urash phansi uyokhala urash phansi siyophinda siphayikhathe lebitolima ubaba wethu Donald Gilona, ubaba wethu. Donald Gilona, ubaba wethu. Mayibuye!
Africa.
Africa.
Mayibuye. Take a seat, Mr. Anderson.
Interference in domestic affairs ends. I want to know what is the difference in constructive engagement and interference in domestic affairs. And I want to know why do they selectively interfere in the domestic affairs of different countries. I want to know, were they not interfering in the domestic affairs when they sent an army into Vietnam? At this moment they are sending in and assisting subversive elements in Nicaragua. They are assisting subversive elements in El Salvador. And they have the temerity to say that they will not involve themselves in the internal affairs of this country. That is what I mean by selective constructive engagement or selective decisions not to involve themselves, committed to peaceful change. It is not a violent organization. The only violent organization in this country is the nationalist government. Apartheid itself is a violent system. And to keep this violent system going, this government has to use violence. And that is what I meant, that at the point of a gun, this system is being maintained. And it is not the UDF that's responsible for violence, it's Lefranchi, PW Botha, Pink Botha, and the rest of the nationalists.
I'd now like to call upon Maulana Rafiq Hassan, Bishop Reuben Philip, and Pandit Kiran Satgur to deliver an interfaith prayer.
Our program director and all our dignitaries and all that are present, all protocols observed, I greet you with the universal greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of God Almighty be on all of us. I think it is fitting in an occasion like this to honor our late Dr. Farooq Meer and all our other stalwarts and freedom fighters who are here and not here, with a verse in the Quran in chapter 4 which says, "And why should you not fight in the cause of God, of those who being weak and ill-treated and oppressed, men, women, and children, whose cry is, "Our Lord, rescue us from this town whose people are oppressors, and raise us for one who will protect us, and raise for us one who will help us." And I think in our history in South Africa, we had many people like this who came to help the oppressed people. And so I want to end with a dua or a prayer that we make from the Islamic point of view, and I'm going to read it. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. May God Almighty bless and give our late Dr. Farooq Meer the highest reward that he deserves. In that pamphlet that we see on our table, he said we entered the struggle not wanting any reward after the struggle. And he was talking about this worldly reward. But I think God Almighty has given him the highest reward in the hereafter. I thank you.
My Prem Namaste, Sanbonani, Namaskar, Assalamu Alaikum. I acknowledge our highest members of parliament that are here with us this afternoon. I acknowledge members of the Meer family, and I acknowledge fellow activists from eras gone by. Dear friends, can we just bow our heads? I would like to chant our universal prayer, which is the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Na Prachodaya. Dear friends, when we reflect on prayer and we reflect on the different scripture that we all refer to, we look at it for comfort and guidance. And I would like to reflect on the Rig Ved prayer, which refers to the prayer for unity. And it says, "O all humanity, let the object of our thoughts be the same, and the place of our assembly be common. Let our minds be of one accord, and our hearts be united. May you be inspired jointly in prayer, for you have been provided for equally, so that we may receive and offer equally." In a loving memory of Dr. Farooq Meer, a fearless champion of human rights and social justice, today we gather with heavy hearts to bid farewell to an extraordinary soul. Dr. Farooq Meer, a true hero in the pursuit of justice, equality, and human rights. Dr. Meer's remarkable journey as a civic activist, a medical doctor, and a social campaigner has left an indelible mark on the lives of countless individuals. He was born with a passion for justice and an unwavering belief in the inherent value of human life. Dr. Meer dedicated his entire life to challenging injustice wherever he found it. As a member of the Natal Indian Congress, he fearlessly took on the oppressive regime of apartheid, standing tall against the tricameral elections that aimed to perpetuate division and segregation. We recall from the Hindu sector that Dr. Farooq Meer spent a lot of time with us in the Arya Samaj and the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha. When there was a call for us to have national prayers, he even sat and he partook of the Havan ceremonies that we took part in. He went out to different areas, and this is where I was very honored to be part of his team, where we worked in Northern Natal together in the 80s to request people not to vote for the tricameral system. And I had the honor of having him in my flat. We went out to different areas with Maniben Sita, George Suprasad, and various leaders. So Dr. Meer was not just a vocal advocate for change, he was also a living embodiment of the principles he fought for. As a medical doctor, he cared for the sick and vulnerable, providing them with much needed care and compassion. And one of Dr. Meer's most remarkable traits was his unwavering belief in the power of unity. He played a crucial role in the United Democratic Front, bringing people from diverse backgrounds together in the common pursuit of just and democratic South Africa. And through his leadership and charisma, he inspired a generation of activists to join hands in the struggle against oppression. We were the youth of that day, and we looked up to him. And as I mentioned earlier, he partook in all our religious and interfaith prayers at that time because it was a strategy that had to be used. His dedication to the cause of human rights and social justice touched the lives of so many, instilling hope in the hearts of those who had suffered under the oppressive regime. His memory will forever serve as a guiding light to the future generation of activists and change makers. Though he may no longer walk amongst us, his spirit lives on in the struggles that we continue to wage, and Dr. Farooq Meer's legacy will forever inspire us to fight for a world where every person is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstance. We say to you, Dr. Meer, rest in peace. Your work is done. But your influence will live on as a testament to the power of one's person's unwavering belief in a better world. We thank you for being an exemplary human being and a true beacon of hope. And I conclude with a beautiful prayer which says, Om Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. We say, Almighty God, you lead us from untruth to truth. He was a person who believed in truth. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, you led us from darkness to light, and he was one of them. And may your soul now rest in peace. Thank you.
I'd like to read a prayer. It's an ancient prayer written many centuries ago. And it's a prayer that's attributed to one of the great saints of the Church, Saint Francis. It is a prayer that focuses on unity and togetherness. It reads, Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. I think it's my discernment that this prayer, this ancient prayer, kind of sums up the life of a remarkable man whom we are remembering today, and more than remembering, are giving thanks for his life and his ministry and his many, many, I should add, costly contributions to the struggle for a just and united and prosperous society. As I talked to a few people about him, I was quite taken aback at how often he mentioned the poor, the marginalized, and the outcast. Clearly, that was at the very heart of what he sought to achieve. To work for a better society in order that the poor, marginalized, and outcast might be treated with respect, and that we might contribute to their human dignity. And when I say we, I mean the various organizations represented here today. There are others. But we've been very blessed, if I can use that word, as a South African society, especially those who come from the underside of the society, that we've been blessed to have these organizations which planted the seeds, which led to the birth of a new South Africa. We often think there are other people and just the politicians who might have done that. Not at all. And I think of my colleague and good friend Steve Biko today, with whom I work closely, and in fact I was the deputy president of the South African Students' Organization, the Black Consciousness Movement. And I want to remember him today as we remember our dear, dear brother who fought so valiantly for a just society. We thank God for his life, for his example, for the countless sacrifices he must have made, and all of that playing a key and pivotal role in the building of what we're calling a new South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our religious leaders for giving us those words of wisdom and appreciating Farooq's contribution to our country and to the struggle. Bishop Philip spoke about Steve Biko, and it's worth noting that at great risk to himself, Farooq spoke at Steve Biko's funeral, quite a landmark. The Natal Indian Congress, where Farooq was at some point treasurer and then secretary, worked very closely with its almost, can I say, twin, the Transvaal Indian Congress. And the two organizations, had similar campaigns, worked together, strategized together, and built a very, very strong front in fighting apartheid. And it brought activists together from different parts of the country. So it's no surprise then that the Transvaal Indian Congress has sent a delegation to this meeting, and we welcome them, and we call upon Prema Naidu to deliver a message on behalf of the Transvaal Indian Congress.
Thank you, Program Director, members of the Meer family, comrades and friends. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, who I'm a board member, and the Transvaal Indian Congress. The passing of Comrade Farooq Meer today is an historic day. It is today 61 years ago that a disguised Nelson Mandela left Durban for Johannesburg, but his journey was cut short in Howick. From that day, Madiba spent 27 years behind bars. It was well known that Ahmed Kathrada was a close friend of Comrade Farooq Meer's sister Fatima and his brother-in-law Ismail Meer. Throughout his 26 years in incarceration, Comrade Kathy was in touch by letter, directly or indirectly, with the Meer family. This was renewed after his release in 1989. I bring greetings and condolences from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation and activists who were involved in the Transvaal Indian Congress in the 1980s. And I bring special greetings to our comrades and compatriots from KwaZulu-Natal. In Johannesburg in the early 1970s, I was involved in an organization called the Human Rights Committee with people such as Sheila Weinberg, Elliot Shabangu, and Mohammed Timol. Our committee was very interesting and understanding. The idea behind the revival of the Natal Indian Congress, which we got a briefing from Phyllis Naidu, who kept us abreast of the event that was taking place here. She was banned at the time, but we kept in touch with her. That, when I first heard of Dr. Farooq Meer, a key role player in the beginning to play. Some years later, after Phyllis went into exile, I started speaking with Comrade Yunus Muhammad when he regularly visited his parents in Johannesburg. Yunus would brief me on the work of the Natal Indian Congress and the emerging grassroots civic movements. He spoke highly of Comrade Farooq as a disciplined, articulate, and a committed member of our movement. Comrade Farooq was among a host of Natal comrades who were detained during the 1980 school boycotts in predominantly colored and Indian areas. I remember people like Abba Omar, Yunus Sheikh, Paul David, and obviously Comrade Farooq. They were brought from Natal and they were taken to Benoni, a prison called Modabi. My job was to take food to them on a Sunday afternoon. My elder brother Murthy was also a detainee amongst them. I was a regular taking foods and taking care of the duties of people. In the old Transvaal, we embarked upon civic struggles and the powerful anti-psych campaign of 1981. It was the Transvaal Anti-Psych Conference that in 1983, we decided to revive the Transvaal Indian Congress and established the United Democratic Front. It is now 40 years since these historic decisions were made. During the anti-tricameral campaign, the TIC and the NIC developed a close working relationship. I remember many joint executive meetings that were held in Newcastle, Ladysmith, and some of the northern Natal towns, where we strategized jointly. When the TIC and NIC led a huge delegation to meet the ANC in Lusaka in 1988, Comrade Farooq was part of that delegation. It is these engagements that got us to know Comrade Farooq well, and was deeply impressed by his eloquence and insight into leadership. The meeting continued during the dark days of the Pietermaritzburg treason trial, where the TIC executive members such as Dr. Issouf Jassat, Kalsim Saluji were on trial with the NIC and UDF leaders. We pursued during a state of emergency, detentions, bannings, until the mid-80s, until the breakthrough in the early 1990s. Ismail Mamoniat, known to many comrades here as Momo, was the secretary of the Transvaal Anti-Psych Committee and the TIC during the 1980s. He is unable to attend in person today and sends his greetings to all. He has also sent messages of condolence that include details of his collaboration with Farooq when both were secretaries of the various different congresses. We will not forget the great contribution made by Farooq and others in the fight for freedom. I know that he was deeply troubled by the slide into corruption, maladministration that characterized our movement for many years in the democratic era. We owe it to Comrade Farooq and many of our late veterans who had given their lives to the cause of freedom by renewing their commitments to clean governance and justice for all. On behalf of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, may I offer our deepest condolences to Comrade Farooq's wife, Rashida, the children, grandchildren, and as well as the extended family and friends and comrades. May he rest in peace. Amandla. Long live the spirit of Comrade Farooq.
Thanks, Comrade Prema. Our next speaker is someone who worked very closely with Farooq in the Natal Indian Congress in all the struggles that took place, whether it was civic, political, etc., and somebody whose relationship with Farooq goes back a very, very long time. Let me call upon retired Judge Thamba Pillay to share some of his experiences with us.
Thank you for this opportunity to pay tribute to a friend and comrade, Dr. Farooq Meer, whose loss has been recognized not only throughout the length and breadth of South Africa, but internationally as one of the icons of the struggle against apartheid. This little speech is largely anecdotal. Less than 10-minute walk from this very venue is the well-known family home of the Meer family at Ritson Road, which holds memories for me going back close to 70 years when I enrolled as a student at the then non-European section of the University of Natal, which conducted its classes from this very venue from where I matriculated in 1954, the famous Sastry College. Fatima Meer, long before she became a professor, was their tutor when I enrolled here in 1955. It is how I got to know I.C. Meer, and indeed the whole family Meer. The family friendship has endured for many, many years. Oddly though, I only got to know Farooq for less years than his wider family, as for much of the time he was studying overseas for his medical degree, and before then he spent his high school years in Dundee. The Meer family was a household name, associated principally with the 1946 passive resistance campaign and the patriarch before them, Farooq's father, with the newspaper, The Indian Opinion. I only got to know Farooq intimately as late as the mid-1970s, following the 1971 revival of the Natal Indian Congress, in which, for obvious reasons, I played no active part, as I was banned from as early as the end of 1965 to 1974, by which time the NIC was well on its way to re-establishing itself after the revival. So in effect, my close and intimate relationship with Farooq goes back to about 50 years or so, although my association with the family Meer goes back almost 70 years. I served with Ismail Meer on the Natal Indian Congress Executive during the presidency of Dr. Monty Naika, until the organization was driven underground by the incarceration and bannings and imprisonment of his leadership, eventually to go into oblivion, perhaps more appropriately, underground until revived. I remain the only surviving member of that 1961 executive under Dr. Monty Naika's presidency. I only got to know Farooq Meer intimately after the expiry of my banning order in 1974. A man of principle, dedicated to a cause, who sought neither fame nor fortune. If anything, he gave his all to the achievement of the democracy ushered in 1994. A credit to the Meer dynasty, much like many in the family Meer. Working with him in the Natal Indian Congress Executive for close on to 50 years, I knew of his dedication, ability, discipline, always willing to put his shoulder to the wheel, no matter how menial the task on hand, ever ready to make house-to-house visits in the various campaigns against dummy state institutions, meeting high-profile politicians, local as well as dignitaries from overseas, radio and television interviews, all at great personal sacrifice and the risks attendant on political activism under the apartheid regime. I need hardly dwell on what those risks were. They were all too familiar, as some of you here present would have experienced. His home was always open for meetings of the executive, and so was his surgery. He married Rashida, whom I befriended at the University of Natal, and we became family friends, as was my good fortune with the whole of the Meer family. At a political level, Farooq and I and a whole support group traveled far and wide, innumerable trips to the then Transvaal to meet with our colleagues in the Congress movement, then again to establish the Transvaal Anti-Psych Committee, and eventually the revival of the Transvaal Indian Congress itself with a delegation that included most of my NIC, ANC comrades of the time. And above all, our greatest achievement, the founding of the UDF and attending its launch in Mitchell's Plain in Cape Town in the 1980, at which there was a strong Natal Indian Congress presence. All of you would have over the past weeks read and heard via the print and news media the praise heaped on Farooq for his contribution to our struggle for freedom. One of his outstanding qualities was never to shy away from a task allotted to him. For instance, he handled the publicity and the media interest on the Consulate 6, nationally and internationally, with aplomb and dedication to the point of neglecting his busy medical practice, whilst I, together with Judge Zach Yaqub and others, handled the legal side of matters as the teams of others on various aspects of that historic chapter in the history of the struggle. All this was not easy with the security establishment breathing down our necks. Farooq was never intimidated or chose the easy way out and withdrew from all political activity. Like much of the Meer family, he soldiered on. Making money was never an issue with Farooq. He was generous to a fault, making his home and his consulting rooms in the city center available for NIC executive meetings, as well as meetings at his home, and thanks to his dear wife, Rashida, always accompanied by a snack or a meal. Apart from his political activism, he was one of those who with Professor Jerry Kovadia, were founder members of the National Association of Medical and Doctors Association, and were ever willing to attend post-mortem examinations when activists died whilst in detention, keeping a watchful eye on state pathologists. We often went out on collection drives together, visiting doctors and lawyers and other professionals and business people, seeking donations for some cause or other. My recollection is at some stage he served in the capacity as treasurer and later as secretary of the Natal Indian Congress. I will never forget the occasion in 1985. Working together, we raised literally hundreds of thousands of rands overnight to pay the bail for the accused in the 1985 UDF treason trial held in Pietermaritzburg. He also attended the momentous meetings with the ANC in Lusaka for talks preceding the advent of the new order. With him, I attended as a representative of the Natal Indian Congress at Codesa. Farooq was outspoken, even described by some younger activists as bordering on being brash. Truth is that he was outspoken and a no-nonsense man. Despite the somberness of his passing, after a somewhat debilitating illness, I would like to conclude on a somewhat lighter note so that we remember Farooq for more than for one facet of his life. There is always the lighter side to those we mourn, and to which only some of us are privy and wish to share to complete the picture, as it were. It was on the evening of the 6th of June, 1980, after a thorough search of my home and later my offices at the city center, I was taken by the security police to the Brighton Beach police cells to be held in solitary under what was then called the preventive detention. I had no idea whatsoever of who else was detained.
Despite having been about 15 years in practice as a lawyer, I had no idea of the situation of the Brighton Beach police cells. All I can say now is that it was as smelly and dank as it can get, with an equally stinking, vomit-congealed mattress and an equally smelling blanket. It was a bitterly cold winter. I tried to work out the location of these police cells from inside my own cell. And I heard late in the afternoon, early mornings, of what I imagined was a call from the azan, which our dear priest will appreciate. Only to discover on the 14th day of my detention, when told that I was to be further detained at the Modibi prison, it was then and then only, as they opened the cell door next to me, that I see Farooq Meer, totally distraught and calling out to his late father in prayer. So it was Farooq who each morning recited his prayer, and not the azan from a nearby mosque, as I had erroneously concluded. I'm sure the Maulana would be very pleased to hear that. Thereafter, a long drive in the cold of winter for an indefinite detention stint in the Modibi prison in icy cold Benoni in July. Due to the stupidity of the apartheid regime, we were able to interact with activists from all over South Africa, among them Murthy Naidu, Amit Bawa, Mos Chikane, Vijay Ramlakan, Ahmed Bawa, Alf Karim, whom I've seen here after a long time, Murthy Naidu, Deepak Patel, Yunus Sheikh, Paul David, George Supersad, MJ Naidu, Dr. Joe Variawa, Kas Kavadia, and a host of trade unionists and many others from all parts of the country. Farooq was buried in the true traditions of the Muslim faith. He recited his early morning prayer as a good Muslim, as I got to know during our incarceration. Be assured, those of the Islamic faith present here this afternoon, that from personal knowledge, he was true to his faith, and may his soul rest in peace. On behalf of my family and all activists who knew and worked with Farooq over many decades, we convey to his dear wife, Rashida, children Nadia, Razina, Zaid and Bilal, and grandchildren, our deepest sympathies, and that his name, like the rest of the Meer family, will forever be etched in struggle history. I know that he was unhappy and unconcerned about where we are presently as a nation of our dreams. But for his debilitating illness, he would not have given up the struggle for a just society. That was part of his DNA, as the Meer family has displayed over almost a century. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's have another round of applause for Judge Damba Pillay. Today is meant to be a day of commemoration, memorial, where we are told to only mourn the loss of my grandfather's life. But I know that my grandfather would want this day to also be a celebration of the life that he enjoyed and lived. And so I'd like to tell you a little bit about my grandfather, Dr. Farooq Moosa Meer. Dr. Farooq Moosa Meer, that's what he was known as to the world. But to us at home, to his family, he was affectionately known as Pa. Pa. Pa, for some of you who may not know, is an Afrikaans word meaning father, which may seem strange to all of you, given that for a majority of his life, he spent his time fighting against a regime that spoke that language fluently. It's surprising because I heard many stories of the special branch breaking into his home in the middle of the night to arrest him. And many times he escaped. Now I know why. They were very confused. They would break in the middle of the night. My mum and her siblings would wake up to alert him of the imminent danger. Pa! 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 Special branch confused. Yanni, are you sure we got the right house here? Wie se pa is dit nou? Nee, I've never heard of a coolie named Pa. Let's go. But that's exactly who he was. Pa. A father. A father to many. In fact, my Pa taught me how to knot a tie. And that is exactly why you will never ever see me wearing a tie in public. He did it with the best of intentions, but he had no clue what he was doing. My tie was either oblong or it had the giant fat samosa shape on the top with a curtain tail at the bottom. My school uniform was never uniform. Nonetheless, I love those ties. Not so much my school principal, though. Pa loved and cared for us deeply. Deeply. Every day, he showed us. But he was also a disciplinarian, and he instilled that in us. Every single day, he woke up at the crack of dawn, 5 a.m., showered, and standing there in his room, ironing his shirt and pants with only a vest and brief on. And then it came time to wake each one of us up. And he would approach each person's room and he would begin to shout very strange and bizarre names at all of us. Get up, you denizens of the deep. Come on, wake up. And now here's where it gets very strange. See, my grandfather would need to get to work quite early, but he would also have to drop us off at school. So to save time, he would shove one of us on the toilet whilst the other one showers. My uncle Bilal suffered many, many mornings. He showered whilst I offloaded my nani's leftover beans curry from the night before. He was suffering in the shower. Sohail, plop, 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 plop. Sohail, I'm going to smell like beans at school. Many times, it took me so long, I fell asleep on the toilet. My grandfather would open the door and start shouting once again, "Hey, get up! Are you finished with that egg-laying business of yours?" Egg-laying business, that's what he called it. We're not starting a chicken farm here. Bilal, the water is not on special. Get out, man. What an inspiring start to the day. Now, I could end the speech with a sad monologue of what a huge void he's left in our lives. And whilst that may be true, instead, I want you all to remember these memories that I cherish. We as a family are incredibly grateful that we were able to be surrounding by his warm and loving presence. So long for now, Pa. Hopefully I'll see you in heaven. I'll be on the lookout for one oblong, fat samosa-shaped tie. We'd now like to play a few personal messages from some of the family that are here and abroad, starting with my grandfather's other grandsons, my cousins, Mikhail and Daniel. Here's a special message from them.
Many of you know Dr. Farooq Meer as a respected community leader, political figure, and accomplished doctor. Although we were aware of and greatly admired this side of our grandfather, to us he was our Pa, with whom we shared a special bond. I remember driving to school at the crack of dawn in Pa's beaten up yet beloved Toyota Corolla, which he reminded us on many occasions was older than both of us. On the way, we would listen to Pa's many stories and be quizzed on whatever he had read in the National Geographic magazine that week.
Often we would play whatever random trivia game he could come up with, and by the time we arrived at school, we were still playing capitals and countries, waiting for someone to arrive to open the gate for us. And because we came so early, sometimes this would take a while. And that's why we know our capitals so well. Argentina?
Buenos Aires.
But just because we didn't necessarily mind coming so early doesn't mean we wanted to stay the whole day. It's not something we made a habit out of, but every now and then we might have fabricated or exaggerated an illness or two in order to miss a day. For the most part, I'd say we were experts. We definitely had our mother and our grandmother fooled at least.
We knew, however, that the real challenge would be convincing Pa when he arrived home from work that evening and wanted to question us on this newly discovered disease that we had. It's safe to say that we never missed 2 days in a row.
So although many of you never got to see this side of our Pa, he was fantastic company and the greatest teacher we ever had.
Finally, I'd like us to play a message, a very, very special message from my grandfather's only living, Farooq Meer, all the way from London.
Ladies and gentlemen, in paying tribute to Farooq, I propose to deal with two aspects of his life. They are, firstly, what shaped him, and secondly, who were the persons who most influenced him and made an impact on his life. Farooq was not only my brother, but my very close friend. In fact, we spent most of our formative years together. Farooq was born in Convent Lane, Durban, which is close to what was West Street. The house, although small, accommodated not just our immediate family, but also our extended family. In a word, the house was overcrowded. However, this was our early education of communal living, where the slogan, "One for all and all for one," applied. This taught us the importance of both sharing and sacrifice. From here, the family moved to 84 Ritson Road, which was located near Botanic Gardens. It was a mixed neighborhood with a fairly equal number of all racial groups, so that when we gathered in the streets to play, it was a multi-racial gathering. From an early age, Farooq liked a challenge and had a flair for winning an argument and was a handful to his teachers. For instance, he was a keen cricketer and we formed a Pinetown school cricket team. Being tired of playing against no one, Farooq decided to approach the headmaster, M.K. Naidu, with a request that the school should join the Natal Cricket League, which, after much debate, he agreed to do with some reluctance. This was a clear sign of Farooq's determination to get things done. Our father, Moosa Meer, was the editor of the Indian Views, a weekly newspaper which was aimed mainly at the Gujarati community. He was highly respected amongst the Indian community, and the leaders of the day, like Dadu, Naika, A.I. Kaji, Nana, and Rustamji, were greatly influenced by him. In fact, the house could be described as a mini United Nations in session. Moosa Meer was a fierce critic of government policies as expressed in his editorials. Household names like Dadu and Monty Naika frequented, and we were in a very lively political environment. This was Farooq's introduction to the political debates of the time, which in turn fired Farooq's interest in politics. The earliest protest mounted by the Natal Indian Congress was the passive resistance campaign launched in 1946, which took the form of defying petty discriminatory laws. This took the form of going to railway stations and occupying seats and waiting rooms which were for whites only. And this led to arrests of the resistors. Groups of resistors were also occupied a piece of land in Ambila Road. In fact, both I.C. Meer and my father's brother A.I. Meer were arrested and jailed. A.I. Meer was subsequently sent to address the United Nations and was the first person to draw attention to the plight of the people of South Africa. Farooq's skills as a persuasive debater and skilled orator with an aptitude for the use of words is largely attributable to his father, Moosa Meer, who was a first-rate journalist and who could have easily coined the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword," and won some of his battles against discrimination by his written words. For instance, when we lived in Ritson Road, it was apparent that Indians did not matter to the authorities when it came to service delivery. The Durban City Corporation was no exception to this. My father had to have his new toilet connected to the main sewer, which is on the pavement outside. All requests to the Durban Corporation to get a connection were ignored. Our father was at the end of his tether, and so he discovered that the name of the chief engineer of the Durban City Corporation was a Mr. Good, spelt with an E after his name. So his name spelled Goode. My father wrote him a letter describing the problems of not having a lavatory for this length of time and the distress that this had caused. He ended his letter as follows: I am appealing to you as a last resort, despite the inexplicable E after your name. Well, Mr. Good, you can imagine, was there the very next day, and this is a clear illustration of the power of words. In 1948, the nationalist government passed the Group Areas Act, which created separate residential areas for each racial group. As a result, our family was compelled to leave Ritson Road as it was declared a white area, following which we moved to Pinetown. This episode had a profound effect on Farooq's thinking and shaped his interest in politics. After Pinetown High School, Farooq went to Dundee High School, where he matriculated. He was a formidable debater there and represented Dundee High School in the Jan Hofmeyr speech contest, which was a competition between all the high schools in Natal. After matriculation, he went to Dublin and was admitted to the Royal College of Surgeons to study medicine. On his qualifying, he returned to Durban and began his medical career. He then joined the political struggle, and this part of his history I leave to those better qualified. All I can say is that he dedicated his life to the cause, he was fearless, and made a great contribution to the struggle. He was a man of great integrity and put himself to the service of the people. He was a man of principle and neither sought nor held any government posts, which is a pity, because he could have contributed so much to the welfare of the people. Nonetheless, this did not prevent him from remaining independent of thought and was a fierce critic of the rampant corruption and the poor caliber of some of those in government, whose main purpose was for self-aggrandizement. Although disillusioned, he still remained optimistic that South Africa would be a much better place so as to redeem and fulfill the hopes and dreams of those patriots who sacrificed so much in the struggle for freedom. On a personal note, Farooq was a caring and compassionate person and was always available to all as a doctor and could be relied upon no matter what the circumstances. I conclude, therefore, by saying farewell to my dear brother, whom I loved and who I will miss, and in true South African fashion, I say, Hamba Gashle Farooq.
I'd now like to call upon my younger brother Samir to deliver a speech commemorating his experience and the life he shared with my grandfather. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Samir, or as my pa and Nani call me, grandson number 2, or most commonly used, their favorite. My journey with Pa was quite special, as it started a month into being alive, and he has since been an integral part of my life. He always told me, when you came to me, you could fit in a shoebox this size. And as you can see, they blessed me to a point where I could never fit into a shoebox again. My Pa was very special to me, as he was many things in my life over the years. He was my nappy changer, my milk warmer, and my pacifier. And that role changed through the years, where he became my storyteller, my homework helper, my cheerleader in school sports, my history teacher, and lifelong companion. He was well informed on so many topics, and that was great because talking to him was like talking to a human library. He was my Google before Google. And if you ask him about any historical figure, be prepared for a 2-hour seminar coupled with quotations from the person with famous pictures of events from the vast collection of biographies that he had. He shielded us from the traumas of the world and of his past, giving us just enough information to know. He gave us a magical upbringing filled with love, hope, and support. And he was always a solace when going through any difficulty in life, giving comfort, sound, and insightful advice, and was not afraid to tell you when you're out of line, and that kept us quite grounded. There's many a time where I've gotten into difficult situations, and my innate instinct is to ask myself, what would Pa do? Or what would Pa have told me? And that will always live inside me for the rest of my life. Over the last 3 years, I've become a father of 2, and even with his great-grandchildren, Jahan and Ruhan, I could see in his eyes the same love he showed to me. And I know that if I could be a fraction of the father he was, I'd be doing a great job. So I want to say thank you, Pa, for giving me the perfect blueprint on what it means to be a father, how to be a husband, how to work hard, how to care, how to show love, and showing me how passion, drive, and fighting for what you believe in can achieve what may seem impossible. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the family. You'll see that the political and the personal are very closely entwined in this family. And we do appreciate you sharing those snapshots with us. Our next speaker is someone who served with Farooq on the executive of the Natal Indian Congress, somebody who assisted us in providing a much needed venue for workshops in the form of the Phoenix settlement, someone who herself has suffered oppression, arrests, banning, and the like, and someone who I think was the only woman on the Natal Indian Congress executive. So no 50-50 at that point. She was the sole woman there, but you know, I think being the only woman stood her ground very, very well. I have pleasure in calling upon Ila Gandhi to address us.
Thank you so much, Program Director. Greetings to everybody. I bring messages of sympathy today and solidarity from various sources. So firstly, Dr. Albertina Lutuli, who is over 90 years old and not too well. She apologized for not being able to come here herself and give you that message. So that's the first message. Also Priscilla Mackay, who was the director of Pinetown Child Welfare and knew Farooq Meer very well. I also bring a message of sympathy and solidarity from the Phoenix Settlement Trust that Maggie spoke about, the Gandhi Development Trust, and my family. We had a long, family contact with the Meers going back to my grandfather's time. So, I bring sympathies and solidarity with the family today to them. As we celebrate Farooq's life today, I want to raise just 3 points. There's a lot that one can say. Already we've heard so many things. But 3 points that come to my mind. Number 1 is about women. Number 2 is his unswerving dedication to the cause and his dedication to the Freedom Charter. He was absolutely dedicated to the document, and that is the second point. And the third point is his unshakable integrity. We've already heard about that as well. But I want to say that it is significant that we are having this memorial service in the month of August, which is dedicated to women. We have heard already that Farooq belonged to a family where there were powerful women. But he also, if you remember the meetings and things, those of you who remember, Rashida was always next to him, by his side, not behind him, by his side. And that was important. He always gave that importance to have Rashida there. And that can be seen in the powerful women in the family. Razina, Nadia, Fatima Mir, all the other girls in the family, all of them have played a major role in the women's struggle. I forgot that I also bring a message from the erstwhile Natal Organization of Women, which also worked very closely with Farooq Meer. When I talk about his dedication, you know, if you asked him to raise a certain amount, he would raise it. He had that ability. He'll go out of his way and he would raise that money. That was an ability and a dedication to the service. When I talk about integrity, we've already heard that he won't mince his words. If he saw something wrong, he would point it out immediately and say, this is not right. It has to be corrected. And I think those 3 points, in my mind, actually typify Farooq's personality. His dedication to women's struggle, his dedication to integrity, and his dedication to dedication itself. Dedication to the Freedom Charter and the points, the 10 points of the Freedom Charter. I would say to the young people who haven't read the Freedom Charter, please read it. And let's work towards achieving that in our country. Then we will say that we have achieved the dream of this powerful figure. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Comrade Ila. Still going strong. Our next speaker has actually recorded a message and was very disappointed at not being able to be here, but made sure that that message was recorded. And, you know, Farooq and the Natal Indian Congress actually were able to, even in the worst days of apartheid, build relations across racial lines. So there was working together with structures in other communities across racial lines, areas such as Lamontville, Claremont, Hambanati, you name it. But there were interactions and working together, joint strategizing, and when the UDF campaigns were launched, this is how we had these non-racial campaigns. So our next speaker is someone who used to be very active in LARA, the Lamontville Residents Association, who used to be a journalist and a member of MWASA, and who is now currently the Deputy Speaker in the National Assembly, Lechisa Tsinoli.
These are sad days in our country, given the problems and challenges we are facing, to have to lose a person of the caliber of Farooq Meer. He is one of the comrades who, over a long period of time, we fought along with to bring about a different dispensation in our country and to deepen the democratic result of that process. We pass on our condolences to the family, and that we hope they'll find solace in the knowledge that what he stood for, the principles that guided him, remain a guiding light for us as well. And his legacy is assured in that many in the province of KZN and in the country as a whole who knew him and knew what he stood for remain committed to pursue them with passion.
So that was a brief message from Lechisa, who could not be here. Our next speaker is someone that Farooq worked with at the level of NAMDA, the National Association of the National Medical and Dental Association, someone that he worked with in the UDF, and again, an example of how, even in the most trying of times, non-racial struggle did occur. I have pleasure in calling upon Dr. Deliza Mg.
Program Director, the family of Farooq Meer, members and leadership of political parties present, Ministers Pravin Gordon and Joe Patla, dignitaries, religious leaders, friends and comrades. I heard Bishop Reuben Phillips saying he was a deputy president of SASO, the South African Student Organization, and that he worked with Steve Biko. Well, standing in front of you here is someone who was a president of SASO. I thought I'd just put in that one. Also, I heard Judge Tamba Pillay make reference to the Brighton Beach police station. I don't know what was so special about it, because I was also taken there after I had spoken at Steve Biko's funeral, also in King Williamstown. And I hear Farooq also spoke there. I don't remember, there were just too many people. But the funny thing about Brighton Beach in this context is that the following day, after coming back from Steve Biko's funeral, having been kept there overnight, the security police came and picked me up and bundled me into a car, and next to me was Fatima Meer. And we were driven all the way to Pretoria. She was taken to the security prison for the women, and I was taken to the men's prison, after which I was transferred to Modabi as well. So it's quite interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was asked to speak at this gathering, I was initially reluctant because I had a family commitment in Cape Town. My daughter turns 40 today. You know, given the struggle days, we were never with family. We were always away, campaigning, never there for birthdays, funerals, always on the go. So I said to Comrade Alf Karim, when he approached me, I said, you know, this is a sensitive topic. But on reflection, after looking back at the life of Farooq Meer and the struggle contributions he made and the sacrifices he made, I was able to say to my family, I have to go and be present at Farooq's memorial. Rashida, I trust that our presence here, all of us, will find you some solace and peace and acceptance of the fact that your partner is no longer with you today. I stand here today to pay tribute to the late Dr. Farooq Meer as a colleague in the medical fraternity. But despite his medical qualifications, Farooq's public profile was that of a political activist, as you've heard, in the ANC, UDF, and the NIC. As a medical professional, he joined us in the formation of an anti-apartheid medical organization, which we call the National Medical and Dental Association, NAMDA, which was launched here in Durban at the Teachers Center in 1983. He was present with us. Together with him, we were with other prominent medical professionals, such as Dr. Isab Jassat from the TIC as well, Dr. Chota Mutala from Marisburg, Prof. Jerry Kuvadia, whom I worked with very closely after I was elected the first General Secretary of NAMDA, and he being an executive member. Now I see where Farooq's fundraising capabilities came from. He was always on our case to make a contribution to the NIC cause and the struggle generally. Now, it is often wondered by many observers and students of history why so many medical professionals take part in prominent ways like Farooq did in the struggles, in the political struggles of the majority of the population. This especially given that they are themselves more privileged, as we have seen in Farooq's case, and that they stand to make a lot of money just by remaining doctors and consulting patients in their rooms, instead of involving themselves at greater risk and danger, such as imprisonment, torture, detention, which Farooq also suffered, and sometimes assassinations by hit squads, which were very common during our time. The simple explanation for this is the fact that in oppressed societies like the one we've had, the effects of oppression manifest themselves very clearly through the health of the population that they serve. So whether it be kwashiorkor, malnutrition, affecting children because of starvation, whether it's diarrheal illnesses because of unsafe water that's being drank by the populations they serve, resulting in cholera and typhoid. And coincidentally, we've seen recently an outbreak, Minister Patla, of cholera 30 years after liberation. Again, a reflection of the connection between health and disease and the politics in Pretoria. Tuberculosis and other chest ailments due to overcrowding, and obstetric difficulties for mothers who are pregnant, etc. Faced with the above every day, a socially conscious medical person will know that a more fundamental solution is required, not just to treat the symptoms, but also to eradicate the underlying causes which reside in politics. Because it's through politics and power that comes with political power that you can put in safe running water, you can put in houses for the people, you can bring jobs and give people a source of income. So Farooq was one of those socially conscious professionals who realized that the definitive treatment for the health manifestations of apartheid is the destruction of the apartheid government, and he participated fully in that. These struggles were led, as we've heard, by the Natal Indian Congress, the United Democratic Front, and the African National Congress. Even in this terrain of political struggle, we as NAMDA members also worked with Farooq and the likes of people like Praveen Gordon, who, by the way, is also a socially conscious health professional, a pharmacist. We worked with people like legal professionals such as Yunus Muhammad and Achi Gumede. I don't is here. And we worked with people like George Supersad, who were in the NIC. So in paying tribute to Farooq, we must not forget to thank his wife and family. Again, Rashida and the children, Nadia, Razina, Ziad and Bilal, and the grandchildren. We thank you for having given Farooq the freedom to participate in the struggle for national liberation and follow his conscience fully in that regard. We hope that the consolation for you will be for the fact that he achieved his goals in his lifetime. For us now, it is left to our future generations, the sons and the grandchildren and the children of Farooq Meer, to carry the banner forward. In closing, again, I want to thank you, the Meer family, for inviting me to speak. It has been a privilege and an honor to work with Farooq and other comrades that I have had the privilege to work with in the national liberation struggle. I could not mention others who would have liked to be here because of the limitations of time. And as everybody has said, it is in fact a challenging time now we face, because a little bit of disillusionment is setting in amongst those of us who are in the forefront of the struggle. But hopefully the new generation will take the baton and move forward and sort the future out for themselves. Again, Farooq Meer played his part, he did his part, he ran the race. It's now for you, the younger ones, to take it forward. May his cell rest in eternal peace. Amandla.
Thank you, Dr. Mji. Can we give him another round of applause? In keeping with the current theme, I'd like to welcome the next speaker, who will address us on my grandfather's professional life as a doctor. Now, I must be honest with all of you here, I only know this doctor's second name. I don't know her first name because I only heard the second name. Every time my grandfather would get called out, he'd say, Mizra is calling, we gotta go. Mizra is calling, we gotta go, Mizra. And I spent quite a bit of time in hospital with my grandfather, and that's how I became inspired to be a doctor myself. I'll tell you a story. One morning we left for the hospital because Mizra was calling. So Mizra was calling, and it was breakfast time, so my grandmother insisted, no, come sit, have something to eat before you go, Farooq. No, Mizra is calling. I'm not hungry. Mizra is calling. We got to go. And this surprised me because I would spend the holidays with my grandfather visiting the hospital with him. And on this occasion, when he said no to my grandmother's food, I was shocked. Because if there's any family of ours here, they will know my Nani's cooking is unmatched. I'm sure some of the comrades here will also agree with me when I say that my grandmother's cooking is unmatched. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my grandmother cooked biryani for Nelson Mandela. Yeah, we were going through old photos whilst we were having lunch. And as we went through the photos, I saw a photo of Nelson Mandela in our house. So I asked my granny, is this Mandela in our house? And my grandmother relayed the story to me. She said, yeah, one day, I was minding my own business.
I was in the kitchen. Your grandfather called me and he said, Rashida, Mandela is coming for lunch and he wants a biryani. And I was sitting there eating lunch and I said, how? Nani, you never told me we were eating Mandela's biryani this whole time? So I was shocked that he said, no, he's not hungry because Misra was calling. And so we left and we went to the hospital. And as we arrived, all the nurses greeted him like they always did. Hello, Dr. Meer. How are you, Dr. Meer? Everybody was very thrilled to see him there. And he walked into the doctor's room. And as he entered the doctor's room, there laid out masala sausages, eggs, beans, fresh toast, sliced fruit. He pulls a plate, starts dishing up, turns and bumps me and says, hey, don't tell your grandmother. So, on that note, I'd like to call upon Dr. Misra to say a few words about my grandfather's professional career. Let's give her a warm round of applause as she comes up to address us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mrs. Meer and the extended Meer family, our distinguished guests and friends. I am Kiran Devi Mishra, but Farooq had a bit of a problem with my name. So, and because here in South Africa, everybody says Misra, you know, I would be known as Misra. But I remember you too, Suhail, when you used to come to. Anyway, I first met Farooq, or Dr. Farooq Meer, about 25 years ago when I started my journey into private practice at a small hospital in Tongaat called Victoria. It was a very community-orientated hospital, and we were like a family. So I was looking for an anesthetist to do my surgical work. So I'm an obstetrician, gynecologist, so I deliver babies and do gynecological surgery. So it requires an anesthetist for the surgeries, but it also requires somebody who's willing to come out at any time, be it 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning when Farooq is about to leave for brunch. And as Suhail says, yes, Misra's calling, and I can hear Rashida in the background saying, tell her to wait, you can come back at 12. And I say, Farooq, the baby is coming, it's not going to wait for you. Anyway, at the time I met him, for some reason, we just clicked. Whether it was the brother-sister, the father-daughter relationship, although Farooq said he was just too young, and it would have been too young for him to have been, or to play the father figure in my life. So, but he was a great advisor to me. He was a mentor. He guided me through, you know, and I'm talking the early 2000s, when the trials and tribulations with medical aid and, you know, dealing with patients. But he gave me good financial and investment advice. And one of the things he told me was not to waste my money on a fancy car, because Mr. Gordhan was the Minister of Finance at that time, and then he would want to know how I afforded my fancy car. So at that time, I was driving a Corolla, just like his, and he said, that's it, you just stick with that. And then he also gave a lot of advice to the nurses and to me about finding a partner. And he would give romantic and relationship advice, and the one thing he said to me, be very choosy. Says, don't just settle, you've got to be choosy. And then we spent 20 years of our working life together, and at the end of it, he said, where did he go wrong? Because he says, you're so choosy, you never settled for anybody else. Was it my fault? I said, yes, Farooq, it was your fault. Anyway, as you know, Suhail said, Farooq had a very strong work ethic. And because he lived in Durban and would have to come out to Tongaat, he would leave home very early to miss the traffic. And so he would be in the hospital at 6:30. Well, sometimes a slate would be going on, but most times Farooq would come. And our staff and the theater girls would always say that they knew he was there because when they walked in, they could smell burning toast. We had a very wonky toaster. You know, we couldn't afford much, but the toaster would give you one good slice and, you know, one bad slice. But there would be cheese, grated cheese in the fridge, and that's what Farooq would eat most days for breakfast, the toast and the cheese. And let me tell you, Farooq liked to work, okay? And to work without a break. No, let's do 4 cases, Farooq, and then we'll take tea. No, let's do 4 cases or 3 cases, Farooq, and let's have lunch. No, no, no. We will do, y'all don't need to eat lunch. You're too fat anyway, so you could do with losing some weight. So we will work, and when we finish, then we will have tea. Actually, I know that Rashida is a very good cook. I have eaten in her house. But Farooq never ate. And he just never seemed to drink, or he didn't do it in our... So he was on call, like I said, for for me, 24 hours. And there was never a time that Farooq would say no. So if he couldn't make it, or Rashida had put her foot down and said, listen, we're going here, and you can't go to, he would go, Kiran Bibi, just hold on. Don't shout, don't scream, don't panic. I'll find somebody for you. I'll call back in 10 minutes. And such was his ethics, his commitment, that it wasn't just about him making the money. And his caring, and his friendship with me. He'd phone one of a numerous number of people that he had in his little group. The many doctors, Dr. Desai, Dr. Sadabaras, Dr. Chuki, and one of them would come, even though they didn't do the bulk of, my slate, but they would come out. One thing about Farooq, he never let you down. He would always, always make a plan and find an answer for you. So just a few brief things. Farooq had a love of calling names, okay? And like he said, the denizens of the deep. And he didn't really like my middle name, Devi. So I was always Kiran Bibi, okay? Or just Bibi. And our colleague, Dr. Vallabhji, I think he's here, but Dr. Dilip Vallabhji is of Gujarati speaking. And he had a special relationship with Farooq because he also trained in Dublin. They would spend a lot of time discussing the streets, the River Liffey, the Grafton Street, all the pubs, although Farooq said he had never tasted Guinness. And then they talk about all those Irish women, that had their eye on the Indian doctors. But anyway, Dilip, when Farooq was in a good mood, was the pride of Gujarat. When Farooq was not so good mood, or Dilip had upset him, or he was late, or he didn't come for my operation, then he was the pain of Gujarat. So, Sister Lindy is going to talk a bit more about the relationship Farooq had with the nurses, but when it comes to calling names, he called our nurses. So most of you know what a bhajia is, right? So, and Kumari is a princess, right? So Farooq's name for our core 7-8 nursing team was Bhajia Kumaris, okay? And we won't forget that. So Farooq was such an integral part of our theater family and held in such respect that there was very little that our nurses, would not do for him. Like the one time he went to Friday prayers at the mosque, and Farooq did go to Friday prayers. I can attest to that. Down in Tongaat at the bottom. And somebody stole his shoes, okay? So what does Farooq do? He doesn't walk back barefoot. He phones, and he gets one of his favorite nurses, Sandy, who is here, and he called her Sandalina because she resembled Angelina Jolie. So he called Sandy, please, and Sandy had to get in her car, drive down to the mosque with some theater clogs for Farooq to put on and come back to work. So once he came out at night, actually, to do a cesarean section, and he forgot his wallet. So he gets to the Tongaat off-ramp at the toll, and then phones us. So what do? So we had to get one of the nurses, get the money, go up with the security, go pay the toll, and then Farooq came back. So, and then the other thing about Suhail saying when Mizra called, so we had this joke, okay? A colleague of mine, also a female, had a slate at Mshlanga Hospital. So Farooq would do that slate in the morning, and it would finish, and then he'd come to Victoria and do mine. And then one day he was late. So of course we sitting and waiting, and my blood pressure was going up, and I was so annoyed. Anyway, then Farooq said to me, listen, baby. Now, when Farooq called us baby and Bajakumari and Bibi, it was not in a demeaning way, and we're not talking politically correct. He was like our father or our elder brother. So he said to me, listen, calm down. You are Bibi number 1. Okay? Taya will Bibi number 2. So, chup, and just do the work. So Farooq retired in 2016, okay? And then I had to adapt to the new generation of anesthetists and the new attitude. So unfortunately, I was no longer Bibi number 1 in somebody's life. So, like I said, Farooq's work was phenomenal. You won't find an anesthetist like him who come out at any time. Everybody wants to work 8 to 4, and you don't blame people. However, babies don't have a timetable. So they're coming, okay? So one of the last things I wanted to say is that in all the time we spent together in theater, Farooq would talk to us about how life was, in the good old days, when he was struggling and when he was in prison and the cold, floor of the cell and there was no blanket and how terrible the food was. And then we would talk about religion and philosophy and where we were going to go when we die. Because he said there were many times that he thought he would die. And he had paid a lot of, put a lot of thought into it. And he was convinced that there was heaven and there was a hell. And I believe that the heaven and the hell was here on earth from a Hindu perspective. So Farooq was convinced he was going to heaven and that there were going to be, I think it's the 30 angels that would be looking after him. So Farooq, I hope that you are there and that that special place in heaven is there for you and that all those virgins and the angels will be there for you. So he had a special place in my heart and will forever be remembered in my prayers. Om Shanti.
Greetings to the family and all the dignitaries, to Farooq's colleagues, and to everyone who came out today to be here this afternoon. I work with Dr. Farooq as a nurse in Victoria Hospital in Tongaat. He used to work between Mount Ashcombe and Tongaat mostly, but as Doctor has said, he can work anywhere. First thing about him was that he was a very good doctor. I know that you don't understand when someone is an anesthetist, but being an anesthetist is the life of the theater. The surgeon will come and chop your leg and go home and sleep. It's the anesthetist who's going to be there to see that you have got enough fluids, enough painkillers, antibiotics and everything. So that was Dr. Meer's job. And I think he was also a good doctor because anyone who knows that there is a God is a very good doctor. There's a difference between somebody who's just there for work and money and somebody who knows there's a higher power. So with Dr. Meer, that's one thing that I liked about him. Also, he was a man of the world. Ask him about anything. Ask him about Germany, China, Cuba. He will be telling you that, no, the system there, the health system there, the educational system in those countries, Dr. Meer will tell you about it. I want to say to his children, his family, condolences. you had a father. I know it's not easy to have a father that is an activist, but at least you were more enlightened than us. There were things that we don't know. Today, I'm so happy I'm here because I'm hearing things that I never knew about. So on behalf of all the nurses that he worked with, we want to say to Dr. Meer, farewell, Dr. Meer. Enjoy the other side. Be at home, because we know that heaven is beautiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those wonderful glimpses into the other side of Farooq. Our next video recorded message is from someone who worked, as I said, Farooq worked across racial lines. Somebody who worked very closely with Farooq in the UDF and supported the National Indian Congress and the civic struggle, and an intellectual. At that time, we were able to bring together people from across the spectrum, and supporting the struggles that we had were academics who would research and provide us with information so that whatever we did had a solid foundation. And one such academic who rendered a great deal of assistance was Dr. Mike Sutcliffe. And this is the recorded message you will be hearing.
Good afternoon, comrades. I'm really sorry that I can't be at this very important occasion. Comrade Farooq was very dear to me in my growth as an activist, certainly, together with the other two Meers, Comrade Fatima and Comrade IC. And the three are really the end of an era, but I certainly would always believe that if we want to understand the spirit of death, we need to understand life. We've got to understand what those comrades gave us. It was Vish Supersad, after really being an academic, studying, becoming a Marxist and an analyst of society, that I hadn't really experienced the activism that I was taught when I first encountered Comrade Vish Supersad, who sadly passed on as well. And he came into my office one day on campus and said to me, I'm here to, in effect, instruct me to start helping Community Research Unit and this huge network of comrades to start assisting them in their action-oriented research, whether it was for trades unions, civic movements, etc. And of course, then I started meeting comrades, and they ranged from Praveen Gordon, Delise MG, later Koenig and Klovo, and very importantly, someone like Farooq Meer. The revitalization of the Natal Indian Congress that Comrade Mewa, Comrade Farooq, Comrade PG, a whole variety of comrades had done, really introduced to me that you can't just be an analyst, you have to be an activist as well. And I must say, over the last number of years of my life, I can't remember when that all was the early 1980s, whether we were marching on City Hall, whether we were struggling for the terrible way in which the city treated people in Phoenix around the dry periods of drought, all of that kind of activism required us to bring our analytic skills, our human skills of working with people to do things. And I just never believed this person who you would expect just to have held a life as a professional, anaesthetist, for example, that he could just have so much energy. I think he produced more letters to the editor, more media statements, really that brought together that struggle in very trying circumstances. He was arrested. So many comrades were arrested. So many were killed. In the midst of that, Farooq Meer stood up to all of them. I really want to say thank you to his family in particular, who firstly supported him and I'm sure allowed him to do what he did, because that must have been very tough for his family. They are a wonderful family. I've never met people that when sometimes you meet activists and you don't really understand what their family's like, but Farooq was an unbelievable family person, but we were all part of his family. As I learned my politics, at the feet of all those giants with whom I worked in that period and beyond, I really must say they treated every person with dignity, with respect. Farooq was quite different. I mean, he was certainly someone who would call a spade, as we say in the language of that. He was never shy to stand up and argue his points. Sometimes we disagreed with them, but quite frankly, most of the time we agreed. Quiet at one level, but when he spoke, you knew you were in for a rough ride if you were going to disagree with him, because you'd have to really argue your points there. So we've missed a person who worked right through that at a community level, at a health level, at all sectors, eventually with the new local government system, both the engagements around that and then bringing it into being there. Farooq stood up as a person who was able to take on roles, teach those of us who are younger than him and who were much less wise to the world a lot. So we're going to miss him, but we must always remember that he's in us. He's in all of us. And I think the celebration that we have today is about moving to that next step forward. So thank you particularly to the Meer family, not just the immediate family, but the wide family that have brought to us these outstanding activists. And I'm so thankful that they brought me into a movement, gave me love, gave me care, taught me so many of the skills I might have today. And I really want to say thank you for that. So, Hambagatli, Comrade Farooq, you really have lived an amazing life, and all the best. Goodbye.
Unfortunately, Mike was unable to be with us, and we have that message. Our next speaker is someone who assisted countless detainees requiring legal support, who worked with Farooq in the UDF and in the Detainee Support Committee, and has really been a source of strength to many people requiring legal support and assistance. And as you know, an organization like the NIC was part of the Release Mandela Committee and the Detainee Support Committee and various other structures as well. I call upon Linda Zama.
Thank you, program directors, and let me say good afternoon to my senior comrades. I am in a very interesting position this afternoon because our Comrade Willis was supposed to be here speaking on behalf of a group. This group is called the KwaZulu-Natal Elders Council. Some of you are going to wonder what this thing is. And that is why I'll have to be on point, because Comrade Willis is going to want to know from Comrade Ravi Pillay if I represented the elders the way he would have wanted. It's quite unfortunate that he's not here. He had a commitment he couldn't avoid. He then consulted the elders, and I'm part of these elders. And the elders agreed that I represent them. He went further to say he would like me to represent the elders because I happened to have been one of the members of, the founding members of the National Association of Democratic Lawyers. And I'm glad that Dr. Dilizam G spoke and highlighted his experience with Comrade Farooq as a member of NAMDA. And we do need to boast as professionals that there were once organizations of professionals who did what they did. And obviously, we were inspired, we were mentored by none other than people like Comrade Farooq. Before I embark on some or dive into something that is a bit serious, I would like to salute the Meer family. I know the challenges that face families of activists. It's never easy. And that is why Comrade Deliza made the remark he did about having to miss his daughter's birthday. I know what it costs families to actually allow or tolerate fathers or mothers to be activists. At one stage, I became Comrade Madiba's mother. So, Comrade Farooq became a message to some of us. And that is why I have been mandated to convey this message on behalf of the elders. And some of you are going to, who are these elders? There are just 15 of us. We were appointed by the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC. They were implementing the resolution of the National and the Provincial Conference of the ANC that wanted elders to assist the ailing organization, and the organization that is the oldest in the continent, the African National Congress. In a way, I was relieved that we were being appointed as elders, because it would have been difficult to agree to serve in another capacity, given the challenges that the ANC faces today. So, we agreed to serve because the condition is that we want to be neutral. We don't want to be party to factions. We don't want to be party, well, we are elders, so we are not aspiring to win positions, political positions. So that made some of us comfortable. It was also agreed that we will not have teeth, that we are going to report to the very people, the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC, that we are going to report to them. I know that Comrade Nkosazana 10 days ago raised concerns that, yes, it's a very, very good program, but you need to have teeth. And then I said, no, we're fine outside, because we are not going to be censored. After all, we are elders. We need to spell it out as it is. Comrades and friends, you are here because you supported, you believed that the ANC is a liberation movement, it is a democratic organization, non-sexist, multiracial, and we even have internationalists, actually. I have been following what has been going on in Russia with heads of states. And the heads of states were telling developed countries how they envisage the shift that is happening, not just in Africa, but globally. And what is very interesting, as I was following what was going on, I said to myself, wow, South Africa was way ahead, and we were way ahead. There were times when we walked tall. The leader of Burkina Faso made very powerful statements, and then the host statesman responded, because the note was dominant. It was about Africa, these heads of state. I liked the response of the host head of state. He said he understands what the African statesmen are saying. However, he says it's not just for Africa only. It's about humanity. In South Africa, we did what we did because it was the right thing to do, not just for South Africa, but for humanity. And that is why the elders have pointed out their concerns without any hesitation. What we are saying is that we are facing an organizational crisis, which some go as far as to say it is existential. In simple language, a crisis that threatens our very own existence. The reasons for this are multifaceted, and they include, among others, division and factionalism, poor organizational discipline, corruption, malfeasance, and unacceptable public conduct, poor governance and service delivery, severely retarded economic development, crime and lawlessness, death or a deficient political education. It is an indictment. The elders are not removing themselves from the center of this indictment. We are saying we also have a responsibility to put things right, because, as we have indicated, this is an existential challenge. So we have put a program of action. We do hope that the leadership we report to will take us seriously. But the good thing is that we have accepted that it's going to happen that those we report to take too long, or maybe they don't fully understand the implications of what we are about. We have said we will forge ahead and do the right thing, even if it is outside the organization, but we will do the right thing because we are activists through and through. What we are about now goes far beyond the African National Congress. It is existential. This is about our country. This is about our continent. I remember there are comrades, as we were deliberating, there are times when I listen, when they become quite nostalgic, and then they even say, we haven't even heard the leadership reminding people that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. They miss that. Can you imagine? These are seniors who miss this message, who miss the message that the comrade Farooq Meer, they just lived, they became a message of non-racialism, a message of professionalism, a message of dedication, a message of living a full life. As I indicated, this is a message from elders. It's a group of 15. And what Comrade Willis said to me is that I needed to deliver this message, that I need to indicate that even if there are 15 of us, we are there and we are open. We need to listen. We've started listening to what is relevant, even if it is civic organizations, organized labor. 2 days ago, I was at the University of Zululand. The students were launching a UniZul BRICS commission. There were about 500 of them. There were also academics who delivered messages. There is something that concerned me. First of all, it became obvious that the 500 students who were gathered there at an institution of higher learning did not fully understand the history of BRICS. And then I was saying, what are we doing to our young people? Then, when it was question and answer time or comments, the program director opened the session to the students now, who were gathered there, about 500 of them. Not a single question, not a single hand went up. I had to respond because it was a very concerning experience at an institution of higher learning. What was also very interesting, as we were wrapping up the program, and then the students there was an announcement that, that there were refreshments. They darted to the door and queued for their refreshments. They just wanted their refreshments. Comrades and friends, we cannot. For me, that was telling that somehow we have dropped the ball. And we cannot afford that. Not a country that inspired the world. Our struggle inspired the world. We had a message that inspired even developed countries. And today, we seem to have dropped the ball, but we need to catch it, because people like Comrade Farooq inspired us, they mentored us, they guided us, they became the message. Before I sit down, I was thinking about Comrade Farooq. I said to myself, a person who did so much in a very delicate professional environment, but he just did so much. I said, wow, I wonder what he's doing now that he's not constrained in the body. I can imagine that Comrade Farooq's spirit is floating and dancing, and it is in us. And I think he wouldn't even want to be fossilated in some wall, because he lives in each one of us. And what a legacy. Thank you very much to the, thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Linda. Our next speaker, I think when he was in KZN, was much younger and far more active in student protests and in the medical student council, and worked very closely. In that period of Farooq, we had a very close interaction with organized student bodies. And Dr. Joe Pashala, Minister Dr. Joe Pashala, was a leader of the Medical Student Council. Put your hands together for him.
Thank you very much to our program directors, to the Meer family, his wife, children, grandchildren, and all the extended Meer family, to friends, comrades, all the mourners gathered today, good afternoon. I also appreciate this opportunity for being invited also to come and share with all of you in the memory of Dr. Farooq Meer, to pay tribute to him. We got the message just 2 weeks ago about his passing, 2 weeks exactly, because it was on the 22nd of July. And I happened to be here in Durban on another occasion, speaking to some of our colleagues from the medical profession. I was here to address a conference and a dinner of medical colleagues in the organization called the KZN Doctors Healthcare Coalition, which is led by Professor Morgan Chetty, who's a very active member of the medical profession and public health specialist. As already indicated by previous speakers, Dr. Farooq Meer was one of the outstanding leaders of the Congress movement under the auspices of the Natal Indian Congress. And I'm sure as I speak here, I speak on behalf of a number of my peers of that, the late 70s and 80s. I think I saw Alf Karim here. I don't think Abba Omar is here, I doubt, but the program director, Maggie, was one of our peers in that period. And I think we can say without any fear of contradiction that Comrade Dr. Farooq and those of his peers were our mentors. They are the ones who nurtured us into the kind of responsibilities which we were able to execute at the time. Of course, we didn't always listen. Sometimes they gave us advice, and we went against the advice and we bent our fingers, but we learned in the process in the late 70s, and we got even more better shaped, as his history indicates, in the 80s, through the early 80s, right into the late 80s and early 90s. It is indeed a matter of fact that the leadership roles which some of us are playing, we have played before and currently, indeed would not have been possible without that tutorship and mentorship by these very able, elders of ours at the time. So we owe a lot to them, to the likes of not only Dr. Farooq, but his peers, as mentioned, Judge Thamba Pillay and their colleagues, George Supersat, MJ Naidu, Griffiths Mklenge and Victoria Mklenge, Dorothy Nyembe, Yunus Mohammed. There are many, but indeed we are here to say not only about Farooq, but also to all those elders, of course our chairperson who, of various organizations, as I will talk about, and later on, as Comrade Popo Molefe will speak on behalf of those who led us in the UDF, our president, co-president here, Comrade Archie Gumede. Those are the generations which shaped us, which made us the kind of activists and leaders who were able to, provide leadership to many others until today. Now, as already mentioned about some of the highlights of Dr. Farooq's activism, I personally came to know him more closely in 1980 when we were student activists and leaders at the Natal Medical School. And that's when we started working very closely with the Natal Indian Congress. Also with a number of mass organizations, including Durban Housing Action Committee, which was amongst others led by none other than my colleague in the cabinet, Comrade Praveen Kodan, and many others, ratepayers associations, trade unions, here very prominently in the trade union movement, the South African and Allied Workers Union, SAU, which was led by a very charismatic Sam Kikini. Those were the organizations under which, we actually found our activism in. Now, what had happened prior to that, as Dr. Diliza mentioned, and also our bishop, the banning of the Black Consciousness organizations. I came here just on the tip end of the Black Consciousness movement in 1977. And when the organizations were banned, as young budding activists, we had to resort to very clandestine working discreetly, creating networks of communications, sharing banned literature from the ANC and Communist Party, having small political discussions. And quite earlier on, just a few months after I arrived here, I got involved in a number of, in our orientation, we were orientated by the South African Student Organization, SASO, which Dr. Mji was a leader of. And in one of those, I met Comrade Jay Naidu. And we were coming from one of those seminars when we were stopped by security police. And that seminar was conducted by, amongst others, one of Diliza's very close comrade at the time, Comrade Terence Tryon, also commonly known as Trix. He was one of the people who were orientating us. And after that, as we were dispersing, we were stopped by security police. And so when the bannings came, we kept very close contact with Comrade Jay Naidu, who subsequently introduced me to a number of colleagues at the University of Durban, Westville. And that's where I started to know people like Alf Karim, Abba Omar, and many others who were leading, including also the other Jay Naidu, Jayendra Naidu. Together with a number of those, we were able to continue our networks of activism and going right into the late 70s. We're able to provide the leadership at our campuses. And of course, the reason why 1980 we came to work very closely with Dr. Farooq Meer and the leadership of the Natal Indian Congress was, as mentioned, a breakout of a student boycott in just early around February, March 1980. We started in Cape Town, but spread, very quickly into Durban, especially in the colored and Indian schools, and we mobilized to make sure that many more, all the institutions can be able to join in that struggle. Amongst, in the Natal Medical School, we had people like Dr. Berry Kisnasamy, who were also in the SRC, Comrade Zweli Mkhize, who were also in that SRC. And we worked together to mobilize And when we needed support from the elders, we couldn't approach any other organization except the Natal Indian Congress. And through that approach to the NIC, they were able to put together a structure called the Parents Support Committee for the boycott and giving us that guidance. And that's when I came to know Dr. Farooq Meer very closely, working again with the leadership of the NIC, Jerry Kuvadia, amongst others, the late Griffith Mklenge, and all those constituted our guidance in terms of how to conduct those kind of struggle. And after that, the Release Mandela campaign kicked in, and again, Dr. Meer was also through the NIC part and parcel of that, where we were led by Ntate Achigumede, our president, who was the chair of also the Release Mandela committee. And as a young people, young activists who were sent to run around to mobilize, we learned a lot from those elders. And of course, the RMC, the Release Mandela committee, became the springboard for later on when a bigger mass organization was to be formed in the form of the United Democratic Front. Now, one of the things which I'm happy that I was not the only one who noticed working with Dr. Meer was that in many of these structures, whenever, whether it was the Release Mandela campaign, any other campaign, whenever there was a need to raise money, he would be the first one to be asked to volunteer to raise money. And he never let us down. He never let us, any campaign, I don't think people like Praveen could really be very nice to the business. Maybe they were just too radical to talk to business people. But it looks like Comrade Farooq was very charming when it came to people with money. So even when we went into the UDF, he was there to make sure that we always had resources. Myself and Comrade Yunus Mohammed were charged with the secretarial work, but he was more, again, in the area of providing the funding. Now, we must really, pay tribute to Dr. Farooq, because, as already mentioned, I mean, he could have chosen a very lucrative medical profession, medical career. He was, there are many other of his peers who, took the comfort of a lucrative medical career. But he saw it fit that he saw his role not only as being somebody who must provide, the anesthesia for those who needed surgery, but he also saw his role as being broader in terms of making sure that we can be able to liberate our people from the bondage of apartheid and taking the risks of, harassment, imprisonment, as already indicated. And I think after all these years, I now realize that as Dr. Mji and I'm trying to remember who else spoke about this, I think it was Judge Tamba, about these police cells. What is the place? Brighton Beach. I suspect I was also there. Well, I'm saying I suspect because on this occasion that we were with Comrade J. Naidu and Trix and others, when we met the police, a few weeks later, I didn't know Durban. I was about 2 weeks here. And then about 4 weeks later or so, the police came 3 a.m. at Alan Taylor residence. And I was very unsuspecting. They knocked the door. I thought it, because sometimes we used to wake each other up with some of the students if you want to study early in the morning. And I thought he's one of my colleagues. He wants to remind me that we must study at 4 in the morning. And I opened the door, and then I saw some big white men. And they asked, "Are you Joe Pasha?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Dress up. We're going with you." And then, of course, we went through the interrogation at some place called Fisher Street. At least that one I remember. It was somewhere in Fisher Street, because one of the guys, big guy, he said to me that he's the one who killed Joseph Mdluli. And he said to me, "You see that window? I'm the one who threw Mdluli in that through that window. And I don't feel anything. And I can throw you through that window and I won't feel a thing. And then, of course, after that, they took me to some place. Now I can understand that the way they describe it, it must be the same place, because it was a very dingy police cell with some small, very thin mattress and with a bucket for relieving yourself at the corner. And that's where I slept for about 2 nights. So at least today I've also learned that this place, which I didn't know, that is the place. So as we pay tribute to Dr. Farooq and all the peers, all his comrades and colleagues, I think for us, the generation of the late 70s and 80s, we must say thank you to them, because what we've learned from them, which we took to heart, really empowered us to be able to play future roles as activists and also as leaders of our peers and our country. And I think this is something which we want to also say to the young people, that today, because situation is different, some of our young people are very impatient. They want to be leaders immediately. And we want to say to them that, we think we benefited because we listened to those who were older than us. And, we took our time to learn the ropes. And when the time was right, we never demanded that we want to be leaders. But when the time was right, they gave us the space to play our role. So we want to say thank you to the family for having supported Dr. Farooq, because again, without your support, without all the patience which you had, the long nights when he would leave very early and come back very late, he knew that he was going to get that biryani. So he wouldn't come to a very cold home where there will be no food. So we want to say, Hamba kahle, kawe lama kawe. We'll always remember you and will cherish all the lessons we learned from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I know time is passing. We have 2 more speakers, and I'm sure that you will wait to hear what they have to say. Our next speaker really doesn't need introduction, and that's not a cliche, but I will do what needs to be done. He's been an activist as a student himself at the University of Durban Westville, a leader in the Natal Indian Congress and the civic movement, one of the founder members of the Durban Housing Action Committee. He's been part of the ANC Underground and the Communist Party, part of Operation Vula. He's been a minister in various portfolios. The current one is the hot seat. Let me call upon Minister Comrade Praveen Gordhan.
Amandla, the 3 of us had a deal that since Joe didn't say Amandla, I must say it. Sanburani, Assalamu alaikum, Namaskar, Vanakam, and greetings to the program directors, one of whom I must expose to you. Sohail is not just by coincidence saying these jokes about his grandfather. He's a part-time comedian. He promised me that he'll pay me a small commission if I advertise the fact that he's a part-time commission. The exact amount is still negotiable. There's some good business people here who can help me to actually do that. So ladies and gentlemen, program directors, Rashida and the Meer family, we are gathered here today to pay tribute and of course bid farewell to a unique South African, as you've heard, a comrade, a friend, and a true servant of the people. We are here today to express our heartfelt condolences and solidarity with yourselves as the wider Meer family, and to thank you, as others have, for the sacrifices you have made over this period of time. Now, there are lots of presidents around this afternoon in this audience. the president and deputy president of SASO. I have a grievance against you guys. I'm not sure how many of you remember, but this was the place just across here where the Frelimo rally was called. That was the only time I ran a very fast 100 meters. Up the bank there and across the Mansfield School grounds when the cops let the dogs loose. It was in 1975. Curry's Fountain, of course, next door, has been famous in the Congress movement's history. I think Tamba Pillai is probably the only one who might remember a little bit about it. When the progressives in the Congress movement under Monty Naika took over the Congress, Natal Indian Congress leadership, and took it in a very different direction, as history will tell us. There's also Joe Pashla was president of Azaso. Abba Omar was, I think, his deputy or the secretary. Alf Karim was president of the SRC, the first relatively liberated SRC at what was then UDW. I see Vasu Goundan here as well. He was another one of them. And so there are lots of presidents here, so we've got to be respectful today. Farooq was my friend, my political senior, a fellow activist, and a courageous Democrat and a patriot. A humanist, a caring person, as you've heard. He had a wonderful sense of humor, which to an extent his family has covered, but he was always a mixture of a firebrand on the one hand and a person who could make you relax in his presence on the other hand. And hugely generous, not only with biryani, but in many, many ways as well. And in so many ways over the decades that many of us have worked with him in very different capacities. His commitment to sustaining democracy, ethical political values, and the constant striving for social justice with quiet courage and humility were the hallmarks of his character. He was proud of his family. I won't tell you how much he loved his wife because he kept mentioning her wherever he was with us. I loved his wife, and of course she was his best friend as well, and his children. He was embedded in the Congress tradition, yet maintained a unique political and personal philosophy and approach. So he followed the line, as we would have called it in those days, but didn't hesitate to state his own views when it was necessary and appropriate. He was both an idealist and a pragmatist, but formidably principled, uncompromising in his opposition to the evils of apartheid, to injustice, to divisiveness, to rent-seeking, what we call corruption in plain English, and to any kind of anti-democratic conduct. He was loyal, as many have said already, to the principles of the Freedom Charter and believed, and I here quote the Freedom Charter, as Linda Zama said, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. He was always willing to make huge sacrifices because he believed in that no government can justly claim authority unless it is based on the will of all the people. And we do have a country that is based on the will of all the people. But it's a country that needs a lot of development in many respects, which I will come back to. He also believed that our people have been robbed of their birthright to land, liberty, and peace by a form of government founded on injustice and inequality. That's the apartheid that we left behind 30 years ago. But we haven't left behind its entire legacy because townships are still townships. Dispossession is still dispossession. Exclusion from the economy is still exclusion from the economy for the vast majority of South Africans. Farooq stood at the forefront of the Congress movement and the UDF because he knew, and I quote again, that our country will never be prosperous or free until all our people live in brotherhood and, of course, today sisterhood as well, enjoying equal rights and opportunities, and that only a democratic state based on the will of all the people can secure to all their birthright without distinction of color, race, sex, or belief. In adopting the Freedom Charter as his beacon, he believed and pledged, and I quote again, to strive together, sparing neither strength nor courage, until the democratic changes here set out, that is in the Freedom Charter, have been won. Many have been, but on many fronts we can do much better than we've done over the past 30 years. So through the 1970s and 1980s, Farooq unhesitatingly took up leadership positions in the NIC, the Release Mandela campaign, the anti-psych campaigns, the anti-TRICAM campaign, in the UDF in KZN, and later in the branch of the ANC in his area. In doing so, he rallied civic and ratepayer associations, religious and cultural organizations, student formations, and actively supported local and sectoral struggles on on every one of these fronts. He became, with others, the embodiment of mass mobilization. So he was different in that sense in the 1970s. In the 1970s, when the NIC started, it started as a small executive body. Didn't get involved in mass struggles because we, if you take the average age in this room, I think most will remember from where I stand, just the mention of Robben Island chased people away from us at the time, let alone the knocks of the security police at our front doors or visiting the many meetings that we would have. But he was different. When the time came for mass mobilization, with people like Jerry, Tamba, and others, and Ila, he walked the streets of virtually every area and mobilized people for the campaigns that he was involved in and that he led. He was a campaigner for the Congress approach to injustice, a champion and participant in many organizations that grew from strength to strength, and above all, he actively confronted the apartheid state and those who collaborated with it. Farooq was a caring person, a compassionate comrade, and as Rudyard Kipling says in his poem, if you can talk with the crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings and not lose your common touch, that is indeed Farooq that we knew. Thousands of people whom he touched through his work will attest to his simplicity, his humility, his common touch, his ability to engage all sectors of society, and his deep empathy for the plight of the poor and marginalized. He was faithful, if you like, to the Congress line, to the principal values of the movement and the unity of the oppressed and of democratic whites. At the same time, he was unhesitatingly critical and straightforward in his views when he thought the very same values and goals that he and so many had sacrificed for were being undermined or dishonored or violated as they are today by some. Notwithstanding this important approach, he never disengaged from active participation in progressive organizations and events over the last 20 or 30 years. He remained a progressive activist until his health declined, critical but encouraging, expressive about his disagreements but not antagonistic, never afraid to engage and approach the leadership of the day on matters that concerned him, and many others, never hesitating about taking a stand on matters of principle, Congress principles, and saying so boldly. From a personal point of view, I'm truly indebted to him for his caring touch. Each time I was detained and released, he would be at my doorstep, say, get into the car, let's go and see a doctor, let them examine you properly. But in recent times, Rashida reminded me, when reading a newspaper or seeing an item on the news on TV, he would give me a call. PG, what is this nonsense that I read about in today's paper? Straightforward, you see, to the point. And we must still account to him as our senior. Or what's going on in respect of XYZ issue that is current at that particular point in time. He would not fail to make those wonderfully supportive calls also. He says, don't worry about all these chaps that are attacking you. You do your job. That's the most important thing. But we also had many debates, as others have mentioned, on political issues, on global developments, or on events in South Africa. On many issues that we would finally agree upon, but there would always be times when we disagree and said, okay, we'll settle our difference later. I was fortunate to visit him, Rashida, and the family a few weeks ago, but he was admitted to a hospital a day later. Nadia, of course, kept me informed about what happened subsequently. If you scan the period that all of us are talking about, and let me take you through that memory lane very quickly. 1971, Bolton Hall, that is now a forgotten place, was the launch of the campaign to set up the NIC. 1972, Gandhi Library in Queen Street, I'm not sure how many of you remember it. That was the first conference of the NIC where I think he was elected treasurer. And where Delisa's organization at the time, the Black Consciousness Movement, wanted to absorb the NIC. But later on, as you can see, we converted all of them to the Congress movement. They haven't made that confession here today. 1974, Kaji Hall, next conference. That's when Tamba Pillay was just unbanned, and he was quietly sitting in the audience, if he remembers. 1977 onwards, the struggles in Phoenix Township against autonomy, the Phoenix School Action Committee, the setting up of the Phoenix Working Committee. 1978-79, the first open campaigns against apartheid structures in the form of the anti-LAC campaign. 1980, as Joe Pashla pointed out, was quite a momentous year. Student protests, the setting up of the Durban Housing Action Committee in March of that year, the meeting in Griffith Mtenga's office under the leadership of Archie Gumede, where the Regis Mandela campaign was set up, and the massive student protests that spread to the university and elsewhere at the time. 1981, the anti-psych campaign, where we walked the streets as Farooq did. 1983 or 84, the anti-TRICAM campaigns and the fight against the Koranov bills. 1983, 20th of August, which is coming up soon, and which Popo Malifa is leading, the launch of the UDF. 1985, the Inanda unrest and his detention with several of us. That was a terrible night when Farooq and a few of us, including Jerry Kuvaria, Yunus Muhammad, I think Paul David, were in the same car, and guys with rifles were looking for us. And we went into a warehouse in the Phoenix Industrial Park, and Farooq had a rifle at the back of his head, telling us to get out of that place and get into a car and footsack from Phoenix. But he led us courageously back to the car. 1990, the release of Mr. Mandela and others, the unbanning of the ANC and SACP. And 1991, the discussion, as Prema Naidu and others will remember, the future of the NIC and TIC and the UDF in Johannesburg, with Walter Sisulu, Matkatrara, and several others. 1992 and 1993, the CODESA negotiations, which he took part in as well. And of course, then democratic South Africa. This is a formidable contribution to the elimination of apartheid, the establishment of democracy and its institutions, and the shaping of the discourse on social justice and democracy in South Africa. Farooq understood that sustaining of these democratic values, including non-racialism, non-sexism, and striving for social justice, and the principles of the Freedom Charter and our Constitution will not happen automatically. It will entail constant, non-antagonistic struggles, a unity of purpose to be built, and a new generation of democratic activists being created. And that's a missing factor in the hall today, not enough young people who are going to take over the cudgels and the task of what Farooq had contributed into the years ahead. And in this instance, as I conclude, I want to quote Nelson Mandela as he says that the truth is that we are not yet free. We have merely achieved the freedom to be free, the right not to be oppressed. We have not taken the final step on our journey, but only the first step on a longer and even more difficult road. For to be free is not merely casting off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning. So there's a long struggle ahead. 30 years is too short a period in order to create the ideal South Africa we want. But that does not mean that we must actually give up. And as the Freedom Charter says, these freedoms we will fight for side by side throughout our lives, until we have won our liberty. Some of you will remember the African-American author Toni Morrison, who received the Nobel Prize in 1993 when she said, "The function of freedom is to free someone else." And it's a very thoughtful way in which we can pay our final tributes to the kind of legacy and inspiration that Farooq has left us with, to be formidably principled, uncompromising in our opposition to all forms of injustice, to divisiveness, to rent-seeking, to corruption, to anti-democratic conduct amongst any organization. Be the bearers of hope, a better future without poverty, hunger, inequality, and greed. That kind of future is possible, but that is a future that we have to struggle for. Hamagash li Farooq. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Praveen. And as you will see, that Farooq was his comrade, his friend, many things, and he tried to encompass that. Our final speaker, and they always say, you know, you do this with seniority, I suppose. Our final speaker is Popo Molefe, whom Farooq worked with in the UDF, and this year sees the 40th anniversary of the formation of the UDF. And regardless of what many people say, you know, sometimes people rewrite history and say I was a member of the UDF. No. The UDF had affiliates. The Natal Indian Congress was an affiliate of the UDF. Farooq was part of the UDF through that affiliation. I hand over to Popo Molefe.
Program Director, thank you very much. The leadership that is here present. I must say I feel extremely honored that I've been invited to speak at this very special occasion on which we remember our icon of struggle, Comrade Farooq Meer. I speak here not for myself, but for thousands and more of South Africans in their all shades and colors from across the country who would have loved to be here, but they've not been that lucky. May I give my respect to Comrade Farooq's family, Comrade Rashida, your children, Nadia, Razina, Ziat, and Bilal, and the grandchildren. Now, I think in memorializing the life of Comrade Farooq, and in addressing you directly, Comrade Rashida, it may be appropriate for us to say here that the hand of tragedy that touched you
equally touched the entire South African nation. That the pain that you have felt has been the pain of the nation. And for that, we would like to say that we share with you in this difficult time as you seek to recover from your huge loss. And I think at times such as this, and particularly where I am, with the background of the Natal Indian Congress, I need to recall some powerful words of the first Prime Minister of independent India, and that is Prime Minister Nehru. When he received the news of the brutal assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, and he was compelled to address the nation that day, he had this to say, and I quote, "The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. I do not know what to tell you and how to say it. Our beloved leader, Bapu, as we called him, the father of our nation, is no more." And I'm almost certain that you, Comrade Rashida, and all of you comrades who worked with Comrade Farooq and the children, when the news broke, when you became aware that he was no more, words similar to these uttered by the Prime Minister of newly independent India that said, "The light has gone out of our lives," are the words that would have echoed in your ears. The experience of the passing of Comrade Farooq tells us that a generation of a rare breed of South Africans, tried and tested, is fast disappearing before our very eyes. They are a generation steeled in the crucible of decades of determined and sustained struggle for freedom and social emancipation. Collectively, their character was defined by selflessness, love for their people and their country. For them, living for oneself selfishly and not as a collective, and in the service of, and not in the service of humanity, was meaningless. They understood that lifelong happiness derives from the collective happiness and comfort of society. Their generosity of spirit was the hallmark that defined their character. This was a generation of genuine compatriots and true revolutionaries. They had the wisdom to recognize that communities and society were divided and needed to be united through common struggles. They believed in and were sustained by the vision of a South Africa that is non-racial, non-sexist, united and prosperous. They made, to that extent, enormous sacrifices towards attainment of that freedom, and thus earning themselves the name heroes of our people. Comrade Farooq is amongst the latest of these compatriots and heroes to demise. The passing of Comrade Farooq accentuates once more the reality that generations that created a rich legacy and a proud heritage of freedom and struggle And democracy that we are enjoying today is fast exiting a particular phase of our life and struggle. Today, we gather here, comrades, to comfort the Meer family and celebrate the amazing life of our brother and comrade Farooq. We have gathered here to honor his legacy and that of the organizations that he played a pivotal role in creating. We are here to recall how the courage and determination of Comrade Farooq inspired indomitable hope in many of us activists who lived during his time. We are here to recall how his determination and exemplary life, that life of struggle, taught us never to accept the burden unfairly and unjustly placed on us by the oppressor and the exploiter. We are here to recall Comrade Farooq's faith in the power of organization and the collective strength of a people united to defeat the enemy and their capacity to create a better future of hope for themselves and for posterity. We are here to reaffirm Comrade Farooq's belief that not only a few leaders, as they would have said with Comrade PG and others, but the masses are the makers of history and the drivers of societal change. Today we are gathered here as organizations that recognize that as an organization that Comrade Farooq became the General Secretary of the Natal Indian Congress, would be 129 years from 1894 to 2023. And the African National Congress that he helped to build and he belonged to, it too this year would be 121 years old. And then of course you who organized here in KwaZulu-Natal, eThekwini, you would know that the dog worker strikes of 1973 would, and which the Natal Indian Congress, after it was revived, supported, would have been 50 years old. And the United Democratic Front that Comrade PG, Comrade Maggie, and Comrade Joe spoke about, which we formed together, is today celebrating 40 years of its existence. Of course, we closed it, as you recall, effectively in 1992, having taken the decision to close it in 1991. Very much against the wish of Comrade Walter Sisulu, who had a vision to see the implications of what closing the UDF would be. He said to me, Comrade Popo, you might assume that this large following that the UDF has got, particularly in the minority communities, is necessarily going to transfer to the ANC, and you are making a mistake. Keep the organization, but find a way in which the ANC can work with the United Democratic Front. But look, we had no time for that. We were looking at the election that we had to win, and this organization that many of us were underground operatives of, and now is free. We fought for it to be free. We wanted to go there into the trenches of building branches and making sure that come the election in 1994, the ANC sweeps the board. So we didn't listen to Comrade Walter Sisulu. It's a very difficult position to think of. I don't know if we could have decided any other way. But I think we must say that, as Comrade Joe Patla and Comrade Praveen said, Comrade Farooq played a critical and outstanding role in the building of the UDF and the various grassroots organizations that became the bone and flesh of the United Democratic Front. He played a critical role in the struggles that those organizations prosecuted. Now, I have already alluded to a number of these organizations, and I'm not going to repeat them. But I need to also make one point, which has been mentioned by comrades, that in 1968, the racist government of South Africa introduced a law that sought to establish what was to be called the South African Indian Council. And they said that the purpose, the object of that Indian Council was to assist the government to better manage the interests of the South African Indian community, so the Indian community in the Republic. Now, you know that now in 1981, the Natal Indian Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress launched the anti-SAIC campaign. All of us were part of it, Comrade Prema Naidu and all of you comrades. That campaign demonstrated that the struggles of our people in the Indian communities, of course there was also the anti-PC, because there was the idea of the colored representative council as well that was into that thing. But those campaigns demonstrated that we could unite across color lines. So the African people in the townships were fighting community councils who had already destroyed the urban Bantu council, became part of these struggles. So what was supposed to be community struggles of a particular community then became a generalized struggle of the people of South Africa, which made those South African Indian councils inoperable. So we stopped them on their track. And in 1983, when the racist government introduced the tricameral parliament, the Quorum of Bills that Comrade Praveen spoke about, Comrade Farooq, as part of the Natal Indian Congress, interacted with comrades across the country in the Transvaal, Southern Transvaal, in the Cape Province. The result of those interactions were the formation of UDF Transvaal in May of that year, followed by, I think, Southern Natal in June, and then the Western Cape thereafter. And at that point, we began to feel, with the mushrooming of organization and the mass action that was taking place in the country, that conditions had matured for us to build a broad front that, at a national level, that would unite all the struggles of our people and begin to link across all national groups of our country and to make sure that we defeat the apartheid. Thus the UDF was formed. I don't need to talk about where the UDF was formed, but there were great comrades we worked with. I mean, I used to come here, I got to know comrades like Comrade Thamba Pillay, MJ Naidu, Mewaram Gobin, Comrade Achigumede, Kenny Ndlovu, the late, Comrade Nozizwe Madlala, Comrade Yunus Mohammed, of course, Comrade Diliza Mji, who had been the leader of the Black Consciousness Movement, Professor Jeru Kuvadia, Comrade Paul David, Virgil Bonham, Lichisa Tsenudi, many, many more of our comrades in this area, including Mcebisi Kundu, who was a reverend at the time. So all of us worked together, and Comrade Farooq was pivotal in the struggles that the United Democratic Front waged. And I must say that somebody was whispering to me as we were talking, saying somebody was asking him, but what did the UDF do? We can't see what it was doing. Now, the UDF built the mass pillar of our struggle. It built the mass pillar of our struggle. It forced the regime to release Nelson Mandela. It unbanned itself. It forced the regime to unban the people's movement. That was the UDF. It is the UDF that caused this country, the regime, to agree to go and talk at Kotesa in the negotiation in which Comrade Farooq Meer played a critical role. Because the key demands of the UDF was that, hey, release our leaders. Let's have a national convention where we would hammer out a new constitution for the republic. Unban the people's organization and let their leaders return. Let those who are in jail come out of jail. Those were the demands that the UDF made, and working, of course, with the Release Mandela campaign structures that were very strong inside the United Democratic Front. And all in all, when we look now we look back at the path that we have traversed, we realize that as a result of those struggles and the values that we held dear and those principles, which were informed by the Freedom Charter, which were universal, we're able to produce the best constitution for the people of South Africa. And that constitution, therefore, enshrines those values of non-racialism, diversity, inclusiveness, and of course it included the second generation of rights that says you've got to deal with socio-economic issues, social issues, the economy, health issues that Comrade Joe Butler and them are dealing with. They were all included in that constitution. In many ways, therefore, that which we fought for as the liberation movement, and in the context of those who were inside the country and operating overtly, we were able to ensure that they are enshrined in our constitution. But I think there's a point we need to make, that the observers of political development since 1994 would notice that over time, the values, principles, and the ethos that as a liberation movement and the UDF we held dear are increasingly getting eroded. We watched the conference of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. The outcome of it, one would have mistaken it to be an outcome of a conference held in Ulundi. So it says something, and then it's not the only one. We held a national conference as well. That national conference reflected as if there were no minorities in the country, so we now have to co-opt them into the structures of the ANC. It says there's something wrong with our political maturity. There's something wrong about it. It is something that we have to fix. I can't imagine this big crowd of people seems to have no role to play in the structures that we have created in the country when they have led powerful struggles and they created community organizations. So comrades, these are the things that have disappeared. The principle of participatory democracy has also now receded. It is precisely because there's no participatory democracy through the organs of people's power, which we created in the days of the UDF, that all our councils, the majority of our councils have collapsed. those leaders who were respected in our communities are no more. So it's criminals who come in, they take over, and they cause problems. Every time they go on a protest, they ban tires, they block the roads, and so on. So we have a problem in that. But all of that, and I was whispering to Comrade Joe, point to one thing and one thing only, that with the closing down of the UDF, unforeseen by us, we were also killing the community organizations which were the voice of the people, those organs of people's power. We killed them. So I'm raising these questions, comrades, because we've got to respond to this situation. Politics has changed. Politics has become transactional. Leaders meet to talk about how do we make sure that I stay in my position. You help me to stay in power. Parties, when they talk, they bargain about how between themselves they would agree that they remain in power. They don't talk about the program of delivering effective services to our people. They don't talk about that. And that is why in some instances, comrades would even go out to kill one another because they want these positions. There is a race for control of the budget in local government, provincial government, and so on, because it is that budget that gives them power to control, the power to issue out contracts to their cronies. It has got nothing to do with the people that we serve. So the principle of accountability has disappeared. And because we don't have structures on the ground, nobody can hold these people accountable. The government creates structures of participatory democracy. They say, let's set up community policing fora, let's create health fora, committees, let us create school governing bodies where we would participate. We can't participate because we don't have credible people in our communities, because those organizations that we had created have disappeared. So that capacity that we could be marshalling to support government in its programs, to change the lives of the people, is not there. Now, we do think, therefore, those of us in the UDF 40 anniversary coordinating committee, that we should return to those values. We should reassert the agency of communities, build organs of people's power, consolidate organizations that exist, build new ones where they do not exist, to make sure that in those organizations there is accountability of leadership, but also that those organizations, through the existing structures of accountability, they can hold public representatives at local government level, as well as in the provincial structures accountable. We should stop this thing that we see happening. We used to sing about going to Pitori, Siaya, Epitori, when we were in the struggle for freedom. And that was a song that expressed our determination to be in the seat of power in Tswane. We are now free. We have won that. We are refusing, as the party with the majority support, to sit in that seat of power. We give it to a puppet, maybe coming from some Ojama, or I don't know what those things are. We have the city which is the heartbeat of the economy of South Africa, the Metro of Johannesburg and the Metro of Eguruleni. We are refusing to lead them. Yet there are instruments that we need to strengthen in order to deliver to our people. I'm still waiting to be told by leaders who think better than I do as to what is the strategy of taking somebody whose party has got 1 seat or 2 seats, and you make that person the mayor of the city of the Johannesburg, the heartbeat of the economy. You do a similar thing with Ekurhuleni. Now, these are the challenges that we have to address as a people to make sure that now we turn things around. I think we need to begin to reassert the agency of our people, reclaim the democracy that we have fought for, and reclaim the constitution of the Republic of South Africa. And we will do so if we begin to organize our people and raise the consciousness of our people. I think it's very important that we do that, because indeed, if we don't do so, we shall forever be spectators in the continuing drama of the freedom that we fought for and the democracy that we have begun to build. So on the 20th of August, therefore, comrades, the UDF would be celebrating its 40th anniversary at the City Hall of Johannesburg. And we hope that we can invite everybody, and all of you would also, those who can come will come. To the extent that comrades are not able to come, we'll want to mainstream it in halls like this, where you can look at what is happening and become part of that commemoration of the United Democratic Front. The intention is, again, to organize it in such a way that it reflects the character of the UDF and what we saw ourselves in the UDF those times as the embryo of the society that we were busy building, the new South Africa that we were busy building. And on that note, I want to convey my sincere appreciation to Rashida and the children, the Meer family, and the organizers of this event. I came here thinking that I'm going to read my notes, but you know, as you can see, I just lost it on the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we close tonight's proceedings, I'd like to call upon my aunt to do the vote of thanks, and thereafter there'll be a musical tribute to my grandfather. Please help me welcome my aunt Razina.
It's now rather later than we'd planned, but we would be remiss if we did not say thank you to everyone. I'm Razina Meer, daughter of Farooq Meer, of course, and my father was also a father figure to all of his 6 grandsons, also my 2 sons standing besides me.
I'm Mika, or as my grandmother likes to say, grandson number 3.
And I'm Daniel, or otherwise known as number 4.
Born in Germany, we are very fortunate, nevertheless, to have lived most of our lives with our grandparents. And as much as we loved our grandfather, there's naturally much of his life and career that we knew very little about.
We are therefore very grateful to the many speakers who took time out of their busy schedules today to share their memories and experiences with my grandfather.
Also for me as a daughter and someone who personally witnessed and experienced the atrocities of apartheid, I must admit possibly the ignorance of youth, very protective parents. There were many aspects that I knew nothing about. I did not, for example, know that there was a rifle at the back of my father's neck. I knew, of course, he was in prison. I knew some of the things, but an actual sense of the danger that he was in or that our family was in was mostly something that we were sheltered from.
Then too, our grandfather was so much more. A father, a husband, a medical professional, humanitarian, and activist.
We are indeed all multifaceted, and the contributions of the speakers here today, who have also generously shared their experiences and interactions, have been invaluable in bringing my grandfather's multifaceted legacy to life, and have been a source of inspiration to us.
Putting an event of this magnitude together in such a short space of time was naturally no mean feat. Behind the scenes were many hours of hard work, a labor of love really, by an entire working committee. And we are very grateful for all the hard work that went in, whether it was venues, sound, visuals, brochures, media briefings. They did an excellent job.
A huge thank you to the entire organizing committee and everyone involved in making this possible. Thank you.
Behind every great man, however, is an equally great woman. And our vote of thanks would not be complete if we didn't thank our Nani, Rashida Meer.
My parents were married 58 years. They knew each other their entire lives. Were both very strong individuals who shared very strong values. A.I. Meer was mentioned here at this event today. He's also my mother's father. That's my maternal grandfather, who represented the plight of the oppressed in South Africa at the United Nations. It's therefore clear that these values were very strongly shared by my parents. I should also say, I often say, for every strong man, there needs to be a strong woman, and vice versa. My parents together made a very formidable team. The financial and the emotional strain through the darkest years of apartheid must surely have been considerable. My father not returning home after meetings, being in hiding, never knowing when he was going to be imprisoned, months of imprisonment, all of this were burdens shouldered largely by my mother, who kept us from many of her concerns at that time. She simply got on with things. Many have also mentioned that our house was an open home. Meetings, activists, friends, and family. There was always a ready meal, there was always tea, there was always many of my mother's glorious snacks. We are here today to celebrate and honor my father's life, but we need also acknowledge that this life would not have been possible without a vast network. It takes a village. There's a vast network of family, friends, colleagues, and I should not say the woman behind, knowing both my parents as well as I do, I would say the woman next to him.
Last but not least, we'd like to thank all of you who came out to mourn and celebrate our grandfather today. He was not just an inspiration to his children and grandchildren, but always strived to encourage young minds. And we hope that his life has inspired some of the young people that might be here today, the same way he inspires us.
We all have strengths and weaknesses that are uniquely our own. You don't have to be a public speaker or an activist to live a life of integrity and positively impact those around you. Whatever your strengths and weaknesses, may Dr. Farooq Meer's legacy motivate us all to do the best we can and be the best we can. So in the end, we too will be blessed to have lived a life well lived. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, before we all leave, I think it's only befitting that as we started today's memorial with a few words from my grandfather, it's appropriate that we end today's ceremony with some words from him. In the later years of his life, in an interview conducted by a sociology student from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, my grandfather, my pa, was asked, "Do you think you've been adequately publicly acknowledged in your role in the anti-apartheid struggle?" And he pondered for a while before giving a thoughtful reply. "Yeah, I think so. I think so. I'll tell you why. We never went into the struggle because we wanted political favors post-liberation. We went in there largely because we felt, and I must say, my father, liberal as he was very strong on Islam. And we still got our beliefs as to what is right and what is wrong from there. That if you see a wrong, you must correct the wrong. And don't worry about getting rewards later on. Because if you are looking for rewards, expecting rewards, it's not the correct thing to do. It reflects very poorly on you. So we went into the struggle because it was the right thing to do. We chose the ANC because we felt that was the correct channel to work through in the course of liberation. And the very fact that we are free today makes me feel good. Makes me feel that I acted correctly at that particular point in time. But I never ever sought positions. I never ever looked for any special political favors, and therefore it does not bother me at all whatsoever if I am a so-called unsung hero. We never did this for glory, and we are not looking for any special favors, and I don't want any special accolades. If somebody wants to say thank you, that's fine. And if nobody says thank you, it's also fine. But I'm here today to tell you, Pa, we thank you. And in closing, we have a musical tribute by my grandfather's two youngest grandsons all the way from London. Thank you for being with us here today, and please enjoy.
Hi, I'm Khalil.
And I'm Zaki.
And every year when we visited Durban, our Dada would take us to one of the barnyard concerts. These shows, in a way, began my passion for live music, and as a result, have since become some of my fondest memories with my Dada.
So, in honor of him, we're going to play a song by one of his favorite bands, Queen.
Tonight I'm gonna have myself a real good time. I feel alive, and the world, I'll turn it inside out, yeah. I'm floating around in ecstasy, so don't stop me.